Hello, my name is Louise and I make projects combining engineering and fashion. In this video, I'll be recreating a Michael Jackson Thriller jacket with LEDs for a client of mine. I'll walk you through the patterning and construction of the jacket and also how I made the LED trim. You're gonna wanna watch all the way to the end because I made my dog a matching LED jacket and he does look incredible in red. Many of you are probably familiar with the classic Thriller jacket, but for his tour in 1988, he wore this very special LED jacket. For the start of the Thriller performance, the jacket looked like any other, but once the switch was flipped and the jacket came to life, it was a showstopper. And this was back in the 80s. Michael Jackson was always known for his incredible costume design through his many decades of performing, and this is credited to his incredible costume designer, Michael Bush. Michael Jackson had many costumes, but I'm gonna mention 3 that fit this smart performance wear category. Michael Jackson often wore a white glove on one of his hands, and one glove that he had 50 LEDs wired into the back, powered by a battery at his wrist. The second one I'll mention is a suit that actually never made it to the performance stage. For the This Is It tour, costume designer Zaldi joined the team. He came up with a suit inspired by the Billie Jean music video, where the sidewalk lights up as he steps on each stone. So instead of the environment lighting up, the costume would light up. There were RGB lights everywhere in the costume. In the socks, up the tuxedo stripe of the pant, up the side of the jacket, and into the glove, of course. The last one is his infamous anti-gravity shoes that he used in many of his performances. It doesn't have any electronics, but it's a sneaky design that has its own patent, so I had to mention it. On the stage floor, there's a large nail that sticks up. The nail perfectly slots into a groove in the heel of the shoe, and once secure, it's able to hold your entire body weight as you lean yourself over. You'd still need some muscle strength to use it, but the nail helps a lot. If you're interested in learning more, there is a great book called The King of Style, written by Michael Bush, that goes into great detail on all of the costumes that he did. I'll leave the link below and other references for the costumes I mentioned. Jumping into the details of the jacket, it has the same design as the classic Michael Jackson Thriller jacket. It's a red leather jacket with sequin detailing, and it has a strong shoulder detail, which I've been calling the epaulet. There's black trim accenting the jacket, and the trim is covered in 3 rows of LEDs with clear studs on top diffusing the light. In the book I mentioned, there's a photo of the inside of the jacket, and all of the wiring is accessed through a pass-through at the waistband. The original jacket weighed 18 pounds, so let's see if we can lower that number a bit. Now that you have the background, it's time to get started on making it. Since I'm not as familiar with menswear, I started off with a commercial pattern for a bomber jacket that I'll modify. Bomber jackets have elastic on the cuffs, waist, and collar, so I'll have to adjust the pattern for a non-stretch material. I also needed to pattern the epaulet detail, so while referencing the jacket, I created the pattern pieces for that detail. Once done with all of the pattern drafting, I made a mock-up in muslin. Moving on to the fabric selection, I got this gorgeous red sequin fabric at my local fabric store. This sequin fabric is a knit, so it has a bit of a stretch to it, so I'll have to stiffen it to make it act and look like leather. I started out by cutting out all the pattern pieces in the red fabric. I serged all of the edges of the fabric because after cutting, the sequins kept falling off and the pieces ended up being extremely messy to work with. Serging the edges helps keep everything clean. Since the interior of the jacket will be accessible to get to the wiring, I need to have all of the raw hems on the inside of the jacket well finished. I sewed the bodice together at the sides and the shoulders. I then sewed up the sleeves, pinned them into the armholes, and sewed them in. Here is what the shell looks like sewn up, and look how sad it looks. Let's see if we can fix that. I'm going to use an iron-on fusible interfacing that is used for stiffening fabrics. It's most commonly used in small sections of a garment that need stiffening, like a collar, cuff, or a waistband, but this interfacing will be used for the entire jacket. I cut out the same pattern pieces and interfacing and fused them all together with an iron. Here's the side-by-side comparison of the non-interfaced and interfaced jacket, and you can clearly see how much of a difference it makes. I also cut the pattern out in black lining material and sewed that all together. We'll come back to the construction of the jacket when we need to add the lining and figure out where all of the wiring goes. Looking at the jacket, I knew that LED strip tape would be the best option for replicating the lights. I made a test setup of 3 rows of LEDs connected to an Arduino for prototyping a few things. This setup was perfect for programming the light pattern, figuring out how the LEDs would be controlled and powered, and it's also an easy way for me to test my 3D printed diffuser gems that go on top. It took a few iterations to design the gems, but I landed on a solution that used the minimum amount of material, diffused the light enough, and when the jacket's off, you can't see the LED itself. I used this transparent PLA material and ended up buying a second roll so I could use both of my printers for maximum output. I did end up printing almost 500 gems, printing non-stop for a few days, so getting the second roll was a good move on my part. The last 2 unknowns that I needed to figure out for my trim is what layers of materials would I need to take my prototype to a finished looking trim. I then also needed to figure out how to attach the trim to the jacket. I wanted the trim and electronics to be removable so that the jacket could be dry cleaned. For the layers, I would need a layer of material to adhere the tape to. I'd need another layer on top that has cutouts for the LEDs to shine through and material to hide the unwanted sections of the LEDs. Then on top of this layer, I'd add the gems. I found this great marine vinyl that had the right amount of structure and thickness for this purpose. I started with the collar since it's one of the shorter sections, so if I messed up, it wasn't a huge waste of material. I cut out the size of strip I needed with my rotary cutter, and I attached the strips, using a gem as a spacer along the way. I then designed a DXF file to be able to cut the top layer of vinyl on my Cricut machine. This came out so well, and this would have taken me so long to do by hand, so I'm glad I have my Cricut. To sandwich everything together, I tested out a fabric glue, but I found that super glue worked so much better. Attaching the gems to the top was also done with super glue. For attaching the trim to the jacket, my first thought was to use Velcro. Since there was so much trim, I decided to cut out short pieces of Velcro and have the trim be attached at a few points. This would also help going around bends like the collar, cuffs, etc. This ended up not working and created a puck ring between the attachment points. I scrapped it and sewed down a strip of Velcro the entire length of each strap, and this worked really well, but used a ton of Velcro. To allow for a clean outer layer of vinyl, there is a slit in the bottom layer to allow for the soldered wires to snake out and into the garment. After figuring out how the trim was going to go together, it was time for me to put on my manufacturing hat. I had a ton of wires to cut and strip and solder, a ton of LEDs to trim and attach, and Velcro to sew. For prototyping, I used an Arduino Uno with jumper cable pins, which is really easy for prototyping, but I'd like to show you the final electronics that I ended up using. I'm powering the circuit with a 5-volt power bank. I selected this one because of its high amp output, and it's rated to power the program that I designed for this jacket. The system is controlled by an Arduino Nano. It's tiny and easily has enough computing power. Each trim panel has its own wire harness and connector. I hot glued each connector to add extra security to the wiring to prevent any wires from coming apart due to movement. Once I had the system all set, it was time to finalize the light programming. Originally, I was going to wire all of the LED strips to one data pin, but based on the original jacket, some of the LED trim sections had very specific directionality. Instead of having the lights go all one direction in each panel, some panels had 2 directions. Take the epaulet detail for example. Instead of going front to back, the lights instead started at the bottom of the front and the bottom of the back, and they went up and converged at the top. The waist and the collar sections had a similar thing as well. This increased the complexity of the wiring and the programming, but with a redraw of the wiring diagram and having each section have their own pin on the microcontroller, I was able to figure it out. For turning the lights on and off, I hid a small switch in one of the cuffs for easy access while performing. Now that the electronics are squared away, I need to finish the lining of the jacket so that the electronics and wiring are accessible. Did I film any of this? No, but I'll just show you the end and show you how it works. I used a latching trim to connect the waistband to the bottom of the lining. Opening it, you get a ton of access to the back of the jacket, and you can also reach your arm down the sleeve to install the cuff trim. Okay, and that's it. Here are some final shots of the jacket. I have both film of me in the jacket and also my client in the jacket, who is a much better performer than me. So here you go.
Look at his jacket. It's right now. That is crazy.
Now that you've made it to the end, here's your extra treat of my dog Gibson wearing his matching jacket. Enjoy. Thanks for watching. Give me a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and if you're excited to see more fashion tech projects like these. Bye! Thriller, thriller,